Today we're answering the age-old question, which plugin should I use to stereonize my bassline? In order to do so, I have a setup like this. This is a bassline from a patch that I've been working on for the new preset pack that is coming up, and here I have one of my kick drums. As you can hear, it's completely mono, and we have two tracks right here which we can use. One is going to be for our stereo check. We have a frequency splitter right here, each with a stereoscope, and then we have an overall stereoscope. This is applied to the whole signal. The other thing that we have is a phase check, which we can use. The other check that we can do is a phase check with size scope right here. There we can just look at the waveform to see if there's any anomalies. Now what I would like to do with this video is to show you not only which plugins I would use and maybe why I would use them. I also want to show you the tests that you can do to verify your own plugins. So you can replicate a setup like this and just check it out for yourself. So I'm going to start with MStereoMaker. And all of these plugins have been set up in the same way, all of the 4 plugins that I'm going to show in this video. The way that I've done that is I've went into the stereo check and I looked at the overall stereo field, and then I aimed for around 33%, which is a very high value on a bassline, but I do think that by exaggerating it, you get a better idea of what's going on. What I've also done, and which is a good practice, is I have removed the bass frequencies from processing. In this case, I've done that by this mono frequency filter here. And if we look at the bass frequencies, let's set this to around 150, roughly 100 Hz below what we have as a target. You can see that they're mostly mono, but there's still some stereo field coming through. So this is just on the bass frequencies, meaning that this filter doesn't completely remove the stereo fields below the set frequency. So keep that in mind. You have to set it maybe a little bit higher than you want to. So now let's have a quick look at the phase check. And everything seems to be okay. There's not really much changing. What this signifies is that the summing is completely mono. So this is completely mono-compatible, this process that we're doing here. You end up with the same as if it was the original mono version. What we do need to look out for though is post-ringing. And you might say, well, there is no post-ringing here. It nicely tails off, but there is a filter in here. So there might be something in there. And the way that you see that is by looking at individual channels. Here we're looking at the right channel. And there's a little bit there, and we look at the left channel. And you can see that the exact inverse is there. That's already something that we can learn. In this case, what happens to the right form of the waveform happens exactly oppositely to the left of the waveform, meaning that when they sum together, you get the original waveform that you had before it. And remember that before stereonizing, both of the waveforms actually looks like this. This is the original waveform both for the left as well as the right channel, because the sound was completely mono. Now, before we continue, if you're new here, make sure that you're subscribed. And if you enjoyed the video so far, make sure that you like it. Also, if you want to support me financially, you can do so by going to my Gumroad to check out my products or to go to my Patreon page. Links for both of them are in the description. Now let's move on with the video. Now let's look at the next plugin, MStereoSpread. You can see that we have the same thing in that it's fully mono compatible and it leaves the same waveform. So again, we don't have to worry about mono compatibility here. But what is interesting is that the stereo field definitely looks different from MStereoMaker. And you can also hear that it doesn't really have that elongated click that you hear with MStereoMaker. So you can already judge these plugins not only on their properties in terms of analytically, like we're doing here with all of these tests, but also just on the sound. Do you like that elongated click sound? Do you like that little bit of extra texture that it adds? Then go with MStereoMaker. If you want a little bit more of a cleaner sound like MStereoSpread is giving us, then go with MStereoSpread. We'll again look at the left and right channel. And we can see the same small issues of post-ringing right here. The reason why you get these small amounts of post-ringing and not that much is because 250 Hz, the phase shift that you get from that isn't actually that significant. And in fact, if you have this on your bassline, yes, you can remove this with an LFO tool if you have already resampled. Also, you can just bake this in before you're resampling. That way you won't even have the problem here at the transient. But honestly, this amount of post-ringing is so minimal you can just get away with just having this. It's never really good practice to have post-ringing like this in your bassline because it messes with the transient of the next note or the transient of the kick. You want those transients to be as clean as possible to have the maximum amount of punch even when it's going into your master chain. And I did a whole video on cleaning your kick and bass that if you don't know about this, you should definitely watch. But anyway, what we can do again is compare how the low frequencies are stereonized as well. And you can see that this filter actually leaves more room for the stereo field in the lower frequencies. Now let's look at MStereoSpread's brother. This is MStereoGenerator. This plugin also generates stereo wave from a mono sound source, but it does it with a different algorithm. So already you can probably tell that if one plugin company makes two different ways of stereonizing the sound, that in that case having multiple options to do so is actually a good idea. And you can hear the difference in texture. Here we get that really smeared out, almost noisy kind of texture. And we can again do our check. We can check with LR enabled if it's fully mono compatible. And in this case, we do see a slight change in the waveform. What we don't have, however, is that much post-ringing. You can see the post-ringing is a lot lower in volume. We were hitting -14, maybe even -30 dB before. And here it doesn't go above -50 dB. So a little bit cleaner on the post-ringing, but you get some mono-compatibility issues with this. One interesting aspect though, if we look at the low frequencies, those are fully mono-compatible. Unlike the other two plugins, this gives us actually fully mono bass frequencies. Now finally, let's have a look at wider. You can immediately hear that the click is completely changing again. You again get a different texture and a different sound. I personally don't like the sound of wider on my bassline. It has this kind of wide click feeling to it, which I don't really like. But again, let's do a stereo check to see if it's again at 33%. It's sometimes swinging a little bit above it, but this one is fairly wobbly, so it's a little bit hard to exactly set at the right position. But we're essentially there. But did you see this graph here? Look how wide it has to be here. If we compare that, for example, with MStereoGenerator, and you will see a massive difference in the amount of width that is actually in the stereo field. What's happening because of the different algorithms, this MStereoGenerator gets very, very close to the mono line here. And that's because it leaves all of those bass frequencies very mono. You can see again, we're hitting roughly the same width amount. But here you can see we get these crazy loops here. And that's just because of the different way that the stereo field is being created. Let's again do a little bit of a post-ring test. And we can see that this has fairly little post-ringing. I would say that this is the second least amount of post-ringing of the 4 plugins that we have seen. Finally, we'll do again a low frequency check. And we can see that again, the low frequencies are stereonized a little bit. It isn't as bad as with MStereoSpread, but it's obviously not as clean as MStereoGenerator. So as you can probably tell, there's pros and cons to every single plugin. One of the key factors that I haven't talked about too much, only briefly touched on, is the different sounds of all of them. If I had to rank them, I still like the sound of MStereoSpread the most, but I do think that I might be using MStereoGenerator a bit more on my bassline if it has that kind of texture, if I want that kind of smeared out, almost noisy texture on top of my bassline. It seems to me that MStereoGenerator is exceptionally clean, and if the sound allows for it, I would definitely use it in the future. What I didn't see was that there wasn't an outlier in the negative way, in the sense that there wasn't a plugin that was worst in everything. All of them had roughly the same cleanliness. There was that one outlier with MStereoGenerator being completely mono in the bass frequencies, but all of the other plugins were within reason. And in fact, we saw that the first 2 plugins actually were fully mono compatible. I did actually forget to test wider, but I can also verify that that is fully mono compatible. So only MStereoGenerator is going to have that problem in the overall stereo field that it generates. but for the lower frequencies, it is actually much cleaner in terms of mono compatibility. To me, what this says is that you should really choose on the sounds that you want, whichever plugin works for you. What this means is that you should probably do a few tests. If there are a few plugins that you have that you use for your stereo with that I haven't featured in this video, then you should test them. There might be a few plugins that just plainly don't work in terms of creating the stereo feel that you want for your bassline. You know, that's very strong mono compatibility, especially in the lower frequencies. But the only way that you can really find out is by testing it yourself with a setup like this. So I suggest you do the 3 checks that we have done together. You do the phase check where you just look at it through size scope, and then left, right for the post ringing. And then mono compatibility, you just look at it with the sum. And then you can just turn it on and off, and if the waveform doesn't change, then you know that it's fully mono compatible. For the stereo checks here, what I've done is I've set up a rack like this, where you have 2 default multiband processors. These basically act like a frequency split. As you can see, the macro is set to these frequencies here. And then we're soloing either the midband for all of the middle frequencies, which I'm not really interested in. And then we're checking either the frequencies above this frequency or the ones below it. Honestly, I'm only really interested in the stuff below it because that's the low end and that's what we want to keep mono. And then for our overall stereo width, to make sure that they're all tuned to the same level, we were using a final stereoscope that is just behind this rack here so that it goes on the whole output. So that's going to be everything for today. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something. Let me know if you did by leaving a like, and if you're new here, make sure that you're subscribed. That's going to be it. I hope you enjoyed and I hope to see you in the next one.